It's Parashat Tazria-Metzora, and we have a very long Rabbi Foreman essay, but again, in his colloquial style, I think we will be able to hopefully get through it over the course of the time we have together. And it takes us back to Pesach and forward into, headlong into the Vayikra world, the world of purity and impurity, the world of Korbanot. So without further ado, the bizarre purification ritual of the Metzora. This is for Tazria-Metzora. This year is the two Parshiot are combined, so it works out well in terms of the flow of our learning. Tzarat. The Torah devotes much space to describing this affliction, the states of impurity associated with it, and the ways in which one emerges from that impurity. But what is tzarat, and why does the Torah devote so much space to it, and how should we wrap our minds around its myriad laws? That, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, is a riddle wrapped inside a mystery, inside an enigma. The most basic aspect of that mystery concerns something as simple as identity. What is tzarat, really? Clearly, it's a malady of some sort, but it can take many forms. It can show up as a whitish discoloration of the skin. It can also afflict the hair or the beard, causing a discoloration of the hairs upon the skin. It can even affect a house. Some translations render tzarat as leprosy, but scant evidence supports that translation. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, for one, makes a convincing case that biologically, tzarat isn't actually leprosy. Somehow tzarat, which doesn't obviously conform to any disease known to Western medicine, appears to be a kind of spiritual malady that manifests itself in physical form. A midrash associates tzarat with the speaking of lashon hara, gossip or slander about others. Other sources associate tzarat with a general stature of haughtiness, seeing it as some sort of consequence for a lack of humility. And there are other explanations as well, and all of which indicating to us that we don't know for sure, but we have these ideas. Perhaps the most peculiar aspect of tzarat, though, concerns how the Metzora, the person afflicted with this malady, can leave it behind. According to the Torah, one who contracts tzarat becomes tameh, ritually impure, and can become tahor, pure again, only by undergoing an elaborate ritual procedure detailed in Leviticus chapter 14. Our Parshiot, I think our chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. So this is the second half of Tazria and into the beginning of Metzora. We will occasionally call this procedure by its Hebrew name, Taharat HaMetzora, the purification process for the person afflicted with tzarat. That procedure is what I'd like to talk about here. It seems arcane at best and at worst bizarre. As part of it, the Kohen takes two birds. One of them is killed. There's a piece of cedar wood, a scarlet thread, and a hyssop plant. These objects, along with the live bird, get dipped into the blood of the bird that's killed. The live bird then flies away. It all seems so strange. Should we just shake our collective heads in wonderment, shrug our shoulders, and move on? Or do we have a chance of making any sense of this? Of any of this? Okay, obviously, we know he's leading us to the second option, that he wants to make some sense of it. What does the purification process of the Metzora rhyme with? An important clue, I think, comes from the strange mix of elements that comprise the purification process. For if we read carefully, we can detect an uncanny echo here. You've heard aspects of these laws before. Indeed, they recall another procedure ordained by the Torah, one that appears all the way back in the book of Exodus. Let me show you what I mean. We can start with a striking part of the Metzora's purification procedure, the role played by two birds taken by a Kohen. I talked a bit about these two birds above, but here's a somewhat more detailed look at what happens with them. One bird is left alive and is cast out into a field, and another, according to the text, is to be killed. The blood of the latter bird is meant to drip into a pool of clear water in an earthenware vessel, presumably reddening the appearance of that water so that it too appears bloody. Then the Kohen is told to take a piece of cedar wood, the live bird, a scarlet thread, and hyssop leaves, and dip them all into the water with the blood of the dead bird mixed into it. Finally, at the end of the purification process, the Metzora is permitted to come back into the camp, but they must still wait outside their home for 7 whole days. Ask yourself now, does any of this sound at least vaguely familiar? If the answer is no, here's a little hint for you. Think wood, hyssop bush, and blood. What else? When else earlier in the Torah, back in the book of Exodus, do we encounter a procedure that incorporates these elements? If you're still drawing a blank, note the fact that Tazria-Metzora, the Metzora's purification process, involves a bird that escapes death while another similar being, i.e., another bird, dies. When in the book of Exodus did we have a process associated with certain beings who escape death while other similar beings die? Well, guess what? It just so happens to be the very same procedure that involves wood, a hyssop bush, and blood. So, what is that earlier procedure so laden with these echoes? Welcome to the Passover offering. Again, it's so different than any other of the writing that we've experienced in the sort of bringing the reader along in a journey, which, is both charming and feels perhaps sometimes a little patronizing at the same time. But I think for the target audience that he's imagining, the goal is that it really brings you in. It is the procedure through which Israel left its centuries-long bondage and struck out on its own as a free people. Just before the climactic 10th plague strikes Egypt, God calls to Moses and tells him what Israel must do to secure immunity from the effects of the coming devastation. Intriguingly, this is the only plague from which Israel did not receive automatic immunity, as he explains. When the Nile turns to blood, when frogs or other amphibians wreak havoc on Egypt, when all this comes about, meaning all the other plagues, only Egyptians are affected and not the Israelites. That's just the way it is. But not when it comes to the 10th plague. In preparation for the smiting of the firstborn, Israel is asked to do something in order to procure immunity from what is about to come. They are bidden to undertake an elaborate procedure, a procedure that bears an uncanny similarity to what we will encounter in the book of Leviticus, in the purification of the Metzora. Here is what Moshe tells the people in advance of the 10th plague. Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, this is what we read on the first day of Pesach, go pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. Ulekachtem agudat ezov, take a bunch of hyssop. Utvaltem badam asher basaf, dip it in the blood that is in the basin. Later he's going to say that alternative translation of saf might actually mean threshold of the door. Vihigatem el hamashkof el shtei hamezuzot, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the two doorposts. None of you shall go outside of the door of his house until morning. For when God goes through to smite the Egyptians, God will see the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, and God will pass over the door, pasach Hashem al petach, and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. The above verses detail the offering of the Paschal Lamb, or Korban Pesach, as it is known in Hebrew. In the procedure, one hears a foreshadow of so much of what the Metzora must do. Doorposts, presumably made from wood, that get painted in blood, seem to foreshadow the Metzora's piece of cedar wood that gets dipped in blood. Okay, right? So you're painting the doorpost in blood in the Exodus and late in the Korban Pesach, and later when we get to the purification of the Metzora, we dip the cedar wood in blood. So blood on wood, and then the next time it's wood in blood. By the way, I'll just mention as an aside here, this is one, I think there's two spots in the parallel that feel a little bit of a stretch to me. This is the first one where he says doorpost presumably made from wood. In my brief internet research about how houses in ancient Egypt were built, first of all, they were built from, mud brick, as the Exodus story itself talks about. Um, and if you, add the word wood into your Google search, you'll find that some people speculate that doors or doorposts in wealthier Egyptian homes were made from wood. So it's around, but it certainly does not seem to be like an ironclad assumption that doorposts were necessarily made out of wood. So, okay, that's just noting there. That's one leap that he makes. The doorposts are presumably made from wood. So in the Korban Pesach, you're spreading blood on wood, but you could have been spreading blood on something else. In the purification of the Metzora, it's definitely wood being dipped into blood. The hyssop that's dipped in blood in the Korban Pesach mirrors the hyssop dipped in blood as part of Tazria-Metzora. That's a straightforward parallel. Even the two birds of the Metzora, one of which lives while the other dies, seems to find a surprising antecedent in the Korban Pesach. For here, two other similar beings go to different fates, and this I found to be a compelling parallel, though again, one could argue. Israel, called a firstborn nation by God, survives the plague, while all the firstborn of Egypt perish during the plague, right? So one bird is killed and one survives, one group of people survives, the other is killed. The similarity between the two deepens further when we consider what happens immediately after the 10th plague. Not only does Israel survive, she is set free, or as the verse puts it, sent free into the wilderness, right? The way the Exodus story tells it, right on the heels of the death of the firstborn, it says the Egyptians were urgent with the people, "Vatechazak Mitzrayim ala'am, lemaher l'shalacham min haaretz," to speedily send them out from the land, because they said, "We are all dead men." Now fast forward to the Metzora's purification and consider what happens to the live bird. Vishilachet tzipor hachaya. He shall send the live bird free into the open country. You could hear actually little Freudian or some kind of hyperlink moment. I was starting to say Vishilachet hasair, sending the goat, because there's another parallel which he doesn't reference, that the two birds might make us think of the Yom Kippur service in which we have the two goats, one which is slaughtered and one which is sent out into the wilderness. He doesn't get into that here, but that's also in my mind as we're reading. Okay, so Israel is sent out into the wilderness, into the open country, and likewise that live bird is released and sent into the open country, right? So again, in the Korban Pesach, you have two nations. One experiences a plague of death, and the other lives, and not only lives, but is sent forth. And in the purification of the Metzora, you have two birds. One is killed, and one is sent forth out into the wilderness. The truth is, though, that the Exodus wasn't complete after the 10th plague. Pharaoh's armies still pursued Israel, and a final showdown took place at the Sea of Reeds. Now we're getting to, I think, is his second leap. Interesting, I think powerful, but still a little bit of a leap. And wouldn't you know it, the parallels between Tazria-Metzora and Israel's Exodus experience appear to extend themselves to include that final event as well, the moment Israel finally said goodbye to Egypt for the last time. For consider what happened when the mighty Egyptian army was wiped out in the flowing waters of a sea. Thus God delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. When that took place, when Israel turned around and saw Egypt one last time, what did they see? They no longer saw taskmasters or soldiers. They no longer saw a threat. They saw blood in the water. They saw the harmless remains of the Egyptian army, nothing but corpses thrashed by the sea, lapped at by the waves of a flowing ocean. Now, to me, the second half, nothing but corpses thrashed by the sea, is true. But blood in the water, I mean, the Song of the Sea says the Egyptians sank. Even if they were thrashed about, it's hard to imagine that, not to get overly gory, but that the amount of blood that whatever the Egyptian army could have experienced would have colored, the ocean. But, evocatively, we could imagine the possibility that the Israelites see blood in the water. Fast forward now to the book of Leviticus and consider what is to be done with the dead bird while the live one flies free. The priest shall order one of the birds slaughtered over fresh water in an earthen vessel. The blood of the dead bird is made to seep into a pool of water. The blood-infused waters seem to recall the blood-infused waters of the sea at the moment of Egypt's final defeat. All in all, the procedure of the Tazria-Metzora seems to reflect two linked events: Israel's experience during the 10th plague and their experience during the splitting of the sea. Together, these seem to comprise the climactic moments when Israel is set free. We're almost at sort of the halfway point. One more nega shall I bring upon Egypt. If there's any doubt left in your mind as to whether the procedure of Tazria-Metzora and the purification of the person afflicted with tzarat in our Parashah is meant in some way to recall Israel's experience as they left Egypt, here's one last piece of evidence to help sway your skeptical mind. It is an easily overlooked word the Torah uses to describe tzarat. That word is the term nega. Nega tzarat ki tihyeh ba'adam. He doesn't translate. The nega of tzarat when it afflicts a person. When the Torah talks about tzarat over and over again, it refers to it as a nega. You can listen for that in this week's Parsha. You'll hear it plenty. What is a nega? In English, we might translate it as a blight or an affliction, but we might also translate it as a plague. The Torah's characterization of tzarat as a nega is especially intriguing, since in the entire 5 books of Moses, that exact Hebrew term appears in only one other context. And in the footnote, he notes, of course, variations of the word appear elsewhere, as in the story of Abraham and Abimelech, where it says vayinaga and a verb. I'm speaking here only of the precise noun nega that is used as a descriptor for tzarat. And that doesn't bother me. I think when we look for literary parallels that connect things and unique appearances, we can differentiate between various forms of a word. So the fact that the only other place that nega appears as the word, that sound, nega, appears besides for the description of tzarat is, can you guess where that is, O fair reader? Your intuition serves you well. It's in the Exodus story. The term nega is what the Torah uses to characterize that 10th and final plague visited upon Pharaoh, right? Not even any of the other plagues. The killing of all Egypt's firstborn, the plague from which Israel achieved immunity through the offering of the Korban Pesach. The Lord said to Moshe, Od nega echad avi al Paro va'al Mitzrayim. I will bring one more nega upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. In fact, that in and of itself is interesting. Od nega echad, one more nega. You would have expected the plagues to have been referred to as nega previously. One more nega, but this is the only one called a nega. So it's striking. All told, it seems as if the events of the 10th plague and Israel's subsequent flight from Egypt are being reenacted in some symbolic way in the purification procedure for the Metzora. Let's tally up the similarities. So we've got the Metzora on the left and the Exodus from Egypt on the right. In the Metzora, a person is afflicted by a nega. In the Exodus, Egypt is afflicted by a nega. A hyssop and a piece of wood are dipped in blood for the purification of the Metzora. A hyssop is dipped in blood. Blood is painted on wood. Again, if you accept that the doorposts are made out of wood in the Exodus. One bird lives, the other bird dies in the purification of the Metzora. One firstborn nation lives. The firstborn of the other nation dies in the Exodus. The living bird in the purification of the Metzora is sent out into an open field. The living firstborn nation is sent out into an open wilderness at the Exodus. As the live bird flies free, the dead bird's blood seeps into flowing waters in the purification of the Metzora. As Israel goes free into the wilderness, the corpses of the Egyptians thrashed by the waves wash up on the shore of the sea, and then he adds, presumably, their blood seeped into the waters of the Sea of Reeds. The correspondences between the purification procedure of the Metzora and the process by which Israel achieved its freedom from Egypt are numerous and striking. They don't seem to be the product of mere coincidence. And indeed, we were not the first to see them. Ibn Ezra notes some of these correspondences briefly in his commentary to Leviticus. But it is one thing to identify a correspondence, and quite another thing to understand what that correspondence might mean, what the Torah might wish us to understand, now that we've perceived the clever echoes lurking in its text, right? And this is hopefully the question we've been thinking about. Like, great, you made a great point, you found these literary parallels, but what in the world is the meaning of this connection, right? Why? Why does the Torah pattern the purification process of the Metzora in a way that evokes the process by which Israel left Egypt? To begin to understand this, I think we need to compile just a bit more evidence. In the interest of doing that, let's take a moment to consider some other aspects of the Tzarat precepts. Beyond the linkage we've seen between purification of the Metzora and the Passover offering, there seems to be a disquieting link between Tzarat and another phenomenon, namely death. For example, as mentioned briefly above, the Metzora is considered tameh, impure, but not just impure in a standard kind of way. He or she becomes an av hatuma, a primary source of impurity, similar in almost all ways to the tuma evinced by a corpse. Indeed, Aaron, brother of Miriam, speaks of her this way when he appeals to Moses on her behalf after she contracts tzarat. This is in Numbers chapter 12, after Miriam and Aaron speak ill or speak about the Cushite woman that Moses has taken, and Miriam is afflicted with tzarat, and Aaron says to Moshe, Al natahi kamet, let her not be as someone who has died. The physical appearance of tzarat likewise suggests as much. The Torah describes tzarat in terms of a whitening of the skin. When Moses' hand temporarily becomes afflicted with tzarat, back when God is showing him signs and wonders before he goes down to Egypt at the burning bush, it's described as appearing white as snow. The notion of having skin appear so unnaturally pale evokes the deathly pallor of a corpse. Now, it might be that the connection between tzarat and death is superficial, just a matter of appearances, just a matter of tuma. Or it might be that something more significant is afoot. That, for example, when Aharon appeals for Miriam not to be as someone who has died, he's alluding to something almost obvious to him, a basic and fundamental similarity between the Metzora and the dead. But what is the nature of this similarity? How should we understand it? I'd like to suggest that in some mysterious but essential way, the Metzora is not just similar to the dead. He or she is actually dead, at least from a certain perspective. Now I realize that this proposition sounds preposterous. Death is a rather final state of being, and it doesn't seem to lend itself to differing perspectives. Any given person is either dead or alive, and this Metzora, well, they may be ill, right, if you have tzarat, some kind of sickness, but they most certainly still have a pulse, and in that case they would seem to be very much alive. In what sense, then, might the Torah consider the Metzora dead? Again, we're in this moment where he's, as he said, going to build another kind of collection of information and then come back around to connect the Metzora and the Exodus. The Metzora, the mourner, and the Menudeh. A hint comes in a fascinating discussion the Talmudic sages have about the Metzora. In Tractate Moed Katan, the Talmud talks about how someone should conduct himself or herself while afflicted with tzarat. And throughout that discussion, the sages consistently compare three kinds of people to one another. And he has the reference here, Moed Katan 14b to 16a. It's a very long section of Talmud that does this pattern that he's about to describe. Sages consistently compare three kinds of people to one another. The Metzora, someone afflicted with tzarat. The mourner, someone mourning the loss of a loved one. And the Menudeh, someone who is excommunicated from the community. Over and over, the Talmud poses queries concerning these three individuals. Can an excommunicated person wear shoes? Having determined an answer, it then goes on to ask, what about a Metzora and what about a mourner? The Menuda, that excommunicated person, can he wear tefillin? What about a Metzora? And how about greeting the person? We know the Talmud goes on to say that you're not supposed to greet a mourner, but what about greeting a Metzora? What about greeting a Menuda? You get the idea. Over and over, the sages seem to compare these three different kinds of people. Broadly speaking, the Talmud seems to treat these three as if they are in the same general sandbox, as it were. We need to ask ourselves, what justifies that assumption? What might connect them all? Well, let's see. To see a commonality between the Metzora and the Menuda, somebody who is excommunicated, certainly makes quite a lot of sense. Here I have like that sort of evoking the memory of, pardon me, of the game he taught us a couple of weeks ago of, one of these things is not like the other. We have to sometimes expand our category when we see things in order to understand what connects them all. In a very clear, straightforward way, the Torah declares that the Metzora must situate himself outside the camp. All the days in which the plague is in him, he shall be tameh. He is tameh, he shall dwell alone. Michutz lamachane moshavo, outside of the camp shall be his dwelling. So that makes sense. In other words, the Metzora and the Menuda, as isolated socially and even geographically from the camp, that's familiar. But why is the Metzora somehow in the same boat as a mourner? You might be tempted to respond, that's easy. A Metzora is like a mourner because, as we saw above, he shares certain commonalities with a dead person. But that explanation, on a moment's reflection, falls short, because being like the dead doesn't make you a mourner. Mourners themselves are very much alive. They just mourn the dead. So why treat the Metzora as if they are in the same sandbox as a mourner, right? If it was Menuda, Metzora, and dead person, we would understand something better about the commonality. But Menuda, Metzora, and mourner is less clear. The answer to that question holds the key, I believe, to unraveling many of the puzzles we've begun to consider over the last few pages. Here we go. Who is the Metzora mourning? I once had a close relationship with a person who was dying. As he neared death, he told me something that stuck with me for years. When someone dies, he said, all his relatives and friends mourn him. But you know who ought to be the real mourner? Who? I asked. The person who died, he replied. You see, the mourner is only losing one person they love. But the person who is dying, he or she is losing everyone dear to them. Ponder that thought for a moment. What if that's true? What if by rights the dead should mourn? but they can't because they aren't alive to do so. Well, what if someone experienced a kind of death that still left him biologically very much alive? Should that person mourn himself? I want to suggest to you that this is exactly what's going on with the Metzora. The Metzora is a kind of dead person. There's an aspect of him that is dead, but paradoxically, he is very much alive, at least in a biological sense. As such, he is treated by the sages like a mourner. Who is he mourning? He is mourning himself, which is to say, he is mourning being cut off from his friends, his family, his community, his loss of connection to anyone and everyone. Indeed, beyond the mere biology of death, to die means to lose connection with everyone on this earth that you love. That's the real sorrow of death. Death is radical separateness. And mourning is the way we who are left in this world express our response to that separateness. This is why it is of no comfort at all for a mourner in a Shiva house to hear that his or her beloved is, quote, in a better place now. The words run cold because they are beside the point. Sure, maybe they're in a better place, but I am not with them, and that's what I really care about right now. Mourning is a function of separation. If so, maybe the Metzora, all alone and outside the camp, mourns for himself, for he too is radically separated. In a way, he is even more separated than the dead are, for when one dies, one at least may achieve a certain kind of connection with other loved ones who have previously passed into the next world and are waiting for him there. But the Metzora does not even have this kind of communion with others. He is neither here nor there, not yet a resident of the next world, but not fully a part of this one anymore. He is as alone as one can imagine. A closer look at partial death. This aloneness may partially explain why the Metzora, still very much alive, is treated by the Torah as being dead somehow. But I think we have not yet arrived at a full explanation of the nature of the Metzora's experience, an understanding of why exactly he is experiencing a kind of death, even as he remains biologically alive. I want to suggest that this dichotomy is no illusion or mere metaphor. There may actually be a sense in which the Metzora is fully alive, and another sense in which he's actually died. Earlier, we talked about how the purification procedure for the Metzora seems to mimic the procedure of the Korban Pesach, the Pesach offering. Let's return now to that first ever Korban Pesach, because I think the Pesach offering, of all things, helps us understand this dichotomy. Okay, the birth of community. What happened the night we slaughtered that very first original Pesach offering? The people of Israel gathered in their homes with their families, and, grouped together that way, they carried out the prescribed ceremony for the Pesach offering. They slaughtered the sheep, they brushed its blood on their doorposts, and they dined on the meat of the offering. And after the offering was consumed, and they actually walked through those bloody doorways, they left Egypt behind them for the last time. And at that moment, something new was created. It was a nation. Until then, there had been no nation. Israel had descended to Egypt as a family. In Egypt, that family grew in size, and as it did, new subfamilies were created. But now, on the very night Israel would exit Egypt, something happened. A larger element of community was created, one that transcended mere families. They were born anew as a nation. This indeed explains something curious about the Pesach offering. Generally speaking, the Torah distinguishes between offerings brought by individuals, korbanot shel yachid, and communal offerings, korbanot shel tzibur. But the Pesach offering seems to be a hybrid of these. It has qualities of an individual offering, that is, it's brought by individuals banding together as families, but it also has qualities of a communal offering. For example, it's brought even when the 14th of Nisan falls on a Shabbat. An individual's offering can't override Shabbat, only a communal offering overrides Shabbat. One example for this unique hybrid status is the Pesach offering is not an individual offering, nor a communal offering. It is instead a bridge. I love this idea. It is the offering by which the community of Israel was created. Pesach offering transformed us from being a loosely related bunch of people into an integrated nation. Okay, so that important idea, the Korban Pesach, is by being a hybrid of individual and communal sacrifice, marks the bridge that took us from being a collection of individuals to being a nation. When Israel offered its first Pesach offering, I want to suggest we were born as a people. This in turn explains some additional unique facets of the Korban Pesach. Here's where I think it gets very cool. For example, how were the people supposed to roast the sheep they ate that night? Ki im tzli eish rosho al kira'av v'al kirbo. I never heard this interpretation before. Roasted with fire, meaning this is a verse from the Torah, but the interpretation he's about to offer was new to me. Roasted with fire, with its head over its knees, bunched up over its stomach. What remarkable attention to detail! Why does the Torah go out of its way not just to tell you that the animal needed to be roasted, but precisely how it was to be roasted, with its head bunched up over its knees? Take a moment to ponder that. Does that particular position of the animal remind you of anything by chance? It's the fetal position, the position of an embryo in its mother's womb. So, all night long, everyone needed to stay shut up in their houses. Lo tetzu ish mi petach beito ad boker. But then in the morning, everyone would suddenly rush out, b'chipazon, in haste, and they would rush through a doorway, a bloody doorway. And in the footnote, he mentions, as I mentioned before, that there's an interpretation of saf, which could mean the threshold, so that literally there's blood on the lintel on top, the two doorposts, and the threshold. The analogy to birth seems unmistakable. All night long, in the dark, we waited behind these closed doors. And in the morning, we rushed through a doorway covered in blood. We were born. Before that night, what were we? We were just a bunch of aggregated families. But that night, as we went through the door, a new entity came into being, a single entity, the nation of Israel. Indeed, just before the Almighty informs Moshe about the ritual of the Pesach offering, God digresses and speaks to Moshe about a seemingly out-of-place calendrical note. God spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be to you the beginning of months. Hachodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim." This is the beginning of Exodus chapter 12. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Why was it so urgent to tell Moses this right here and right now? The Exodus is about to reach its denouement. Pharaoh has sworn that the next time Moses sees him, he shall die. God has promised one more climactic plague. Tension is in the air. God has some important things to tell Israel, most particularly the laws of the Pesach offering, which they must bring if they are to gain immunity from the coming cataclysm. Is now the time we need to hear talk about future calendars? How we all should number our months? But this law about numbering months isn't a digression. It is the whole point. It is a kind of topic sentence for the laws of the Pesach offering that follow. This month will be the month we use to start counting our years because this is time zero for us. This is our birthday. We count time from here because this is when we as a people came into existence. Our nation was born through the Exodus, and the ceremony that formalized that birth was the Pesach offering. Let's return now to the purification ceremony for the Metzora, that ritual that so closely mirrors the procedure of the Pesach offering. Okay, so remember, now we're coming back to what we opened up the first sections with. Our Parsha, Tazria-Metzora, has the purification ritual for the Metzora, which has the hyssop dipped in blood and wood dipped into blood, and the parallels to the Pesach offering as we're getting ready to go out of Egypt, and the bird which is killed and the bird which goes free, all that chart. That's what we're now circling back to connect. I suggested to you earlier that the Metzora, while biologically alive, is dead in some way. But in what way? Having understood something of the meaning of the Korban Pesach, we are now in a position to proffer a theory. Consider this. You and I, members of Israel, or for that matter, members of any community, who are we really? Are we individuals? Are we cogs in some large communal wheel? Maybe all of us are really two beings at the same time, an individual self and a communal self. Both are real. Both coexist within us seamlessly, at least when we are in good health. But sometimes one of these can wither. To wrap your mind around the idea of an individual self and a communal self, indulge me in a little thought experiment. Imagine a conversation between someone and, say, a liver cell in your body. One fine day, someone approaches that liver cell and asks him, "Could you identify yourself, please?" The liver cell perks up and responds cheerfully, "Sure, I'm a cell. a very fine one too. I've got everything I need. I've got my cell membrane, I have got my nucleus, I have got my messenger RNA, my DNA, I've got my lysosomes, mitochondria, ribosomes, you name it, I got it. I have everything I need to survive in this environment I find myself in. Has our friend the liver cell told you the truth about himself? Well, to some extent, yes. For at one level, he is indeed a very independent cell. A truly remarkable and intricate set of cellular machinery supports the life that pulses within him. But seen from another perspective, Mr. Liver Cell hasn't really told you the whole truth. He hasn't really nailed his identity unless he also identifies himself as some part of something larger, as part of a liver. He is, after all, a liver cell. In other words, there is a communal side to this cell, too. That communal side of the cell expresses itself in meaningful ways. The cell is designed, for example, to interact with the cells around it. It takes direction from the brain. It responds to metabolic activity around it. More than anything else, its destiny, its meaning in life, lies in something larger than its own little self. It is meant to contribute to the functioning of a liver. And that liver, it too experiences a similar dichotomy. On the one hand, it has its own identity as an organ, but it is also part of something larger. It's part of a human being, in this case, you. And so it is with you or any other individual human being. On the one hand, a person has an individual identity. He or she can be very independent. But that individual is also part of something larger. They're part of a family. They're part of a community. And this too is part of their identity. The story of one's life cannot be told in its entirety with reference only to their individual self. One's life story is bound up as well in their larger self, in the role they play in their families, in their communities, and in the world at large. What, then, shall we make of the Metzora, this individual who is biologically alive, but is in some other way dead? This person who must stay outside the camp, this person who mourns a part of himself that has withered away. Perhaps his individual self is very much alive. He lives, he breathes, he can walk and talk, he is independent. But there is another part of him, the communal part of his identity, we might say, that has atrophied. The communal part of the Metzora is at death's door. In connection with this, it's interesting to note what the sages saw as causes of tzarat. Again, sages, the Torah never says this explicitly. As mentioned at the beginning of this essay, rabbinic texts suggest that in days of old, tzarat could be triggered by lashon hara, slander, and haughtiness. Perhaps not coincidentally, these failings have an antisocial element to them. Not only do transgressions such as slander weaken our bonds with those around us, they betray a basic illusion about our sense of self. They beckon us to see ourselves in a false light, as only individuals. What belief system compels me to slander someone else? I slander others when I fall prey to the illusion that you and I live in a zero-sum, dog-eat-dog world, that the rational thing, therefore, is to put you down to push myself up. Sadly, when I view the world that way, I may not realize that I am attacking in subtle ways my very sense of self. The communal part of me, shunted aside and ignored, starts to languish and shrink away. If the Metzora really is an individual whose communal self is at death's door, perhaps the healing of the Metzora is the story not just of their physical rehabilitation, but their spiritual one as well. Slowly, the Metzora is building back his or her communal self. As a capstone to this process, after the Metzora is physically healed, the Torah ordains that he or she is to partake in a private version. This is, here we are, we're at the climax here, in a private version of sorts of the Pesach offering, right? That's the connection that he built at the beginning. The Tazria-Metzora, the purification process of the Metzora, is a sacrificial process that mirrors the Pesach offering. Why? Because this, after all, is the process by which all of us, once nothing more than mere individuals, entered the community of Israel. It's how each and every one of us finally became something more than individuals. The children of Israel started off in our little family houses, slaughtered a Pesach offering, and suddenly found ourselves integral parts of a nation, united by communal purpose and destiny. And now here is the Metzora, a single individual who has somehow become estranged from that community. After his long ordeal, to finally find his way back in, he offers a variation of the Pesach offering, and in so doing, reclaims his stake in the community whose embrace is still there for him, whose destiny and vision still beckons to him, and to which he happily may now contribute anew. So, hopefully, we followed this journey. We built the parallels between the Taharat-Metzora, the purification of the Metzora, and the Passover sacrifice. We developed the idea that the Metzora is similar to a dead person, but then clarified that really it's only their communal dimension of their self, which is dead, and that they're sort of like a mourner over. And then we developed the idea that the Passover sacrifice is really about our transformation from individuals into a nation, and therefore the kind of birth of our communal selves. And therefore, the parallel is indicative of the fact that the Metzora, therefore, in returning to the community and in rebuilding their communal self, offers the offering which was offered when we became born as communal selves. I guess, you know, a remaining question, and I think this stands on its own, even if you don't agree that Egyptian houses were built out of wood or that the that blood was visible in the water of the Yam Suf. Um, I think the next symbolic step might be to try to develop a little bit more the the symbols and how do they what else is it in this symbolic, this the symbolism of this sort of offering that is indicative of going from individual to community. We have a little bit of the develop, the in the Pesach offering we have the sort of birth canal idea, but there might be more to develop of meaning there. But I find it to be, in his way that he takes us on the journey with little, asides and insights along the way, a really powerful textual parallel and a very, very meaningful development of the deeper ideas behind it. And I see Dara has a hand, so we'll start there. Go ahead, Dara. We don't hear you yet. Oh, Dara, sorry, we're not hearing your voice. If we can't get audio, maybe if you're able to type it into the chat, please do. And we'll come to Joan and Moshe, and then to Bracha.
All right. When the Kohen or the Kohen Gadol slaughters one of the birds, is that made for a sacrifice, or it's just is the meat supposed to be eaten, or it's just like cast away? That's number one. And you pours the blood into like an earthen with water. Is he supposed to sprinkle it on the person who is has Metzora? And three, can't you say that the blood also represents the first plague?
Great. Okay, hold on. Let me try to tackle those one at a time. I don't remember the answers to any of them off the top of my head, so we're going to look at them together. One moment. This is great further learning. Hold on. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so we've got our birds. Slaughter one bird. The live bird is dipped. Yes, okay. So first thing we do see, the water with the blood is sprinkled. Uh, the water with the blood of the, bird which was killed, which was slaughtered, is sprinkled on the Mitzorah. But I don't see any indication that there's anything consumed of that bird. So that answers questions one and two. But I don't know exactly what else happens with that, whether anything else besides just sprinkling of the blood, what the disposition of the remains of the bird that is slaughtered. I don't know off the top of my head. It's a good question. Just make myself a little note because I'm curious about that. Hold on. And then you were asking about would the is the blood, could it be symbolic back to the first plague as opposed to the 10th plague?
Right.
I mean, all the other parallels seem to build up to that moment, but certainly could evoke the beginning as well. I mean, Dan Langer in his book, The First and the Seventh, talks about kind of that idea of sometimes, connections between the beginning and end of a process. So the blood might be evocative of both the first plague and the last plague, or the kind of death of the firstborn and Passover offering. Totally, totally could be. Great, great questions. Bracha, please.
Dara has something in the chat first.
Oh, great. I didn't see it. Hold on. Get my. Okay, great. I saw a while back, James also saw that Yom Kippur parallel. And Dara writes, am I remembering correctly that there's an expression of Chazal that Metzora is chashuv kemet, like an ani? Yes, I believe so. And certainly the Gemara makes that parallel. Um, but you're saying Metzora not just parallel to a mourner, but considered to be like a dead person. Yes, I think there's three things are considered like a mate. An ani, I think a blind person in rabbinic literature. Metzora, I don't remember for sure, but we'll try to check it. Go ahead, Bracha.
First, just a quick thing. I vaguely remember that I think it was the Abarbanel that used the birth canal process kind of imagery. So, that's something I do recall. What he says is fascinating. It's not something you would normally connect, but I can see that there are some very strong connections. My tendency in terms of the way I look at Metzora is that in the center of the word is tsar. It's like shortness, like when someone has a surface level appraisal of another person. So they're looking at it short-sightedly and on a very surface level, which is I think mida keneged mida, paralleling why they get a skin disease that shows on the surface.
Interesting.
And that they're sent away makes sense, of course, because that's what they do to the person that they spoke about, or whatever the situation was. So that's also a mida keneged mida.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Nice. I like that reading. Juggling a few things. Well, let me answer Dara's question. The Gemara in Nedarim 64b says that Arba'a chashuvin kemet. Four people are in whatever way considered like someone who has died. Ani, Metzora, Suma, Umisha ein lo banim. Someone impoverished, Metzora, someone without physical sight, and someone who does not been blessed with children. And then the Gemara goes into a discussion about each one. So a lot to think about, a lot to unpack there. But so yeah. The short answer is you're correct in identifying that parallel or connection. Okay, hold on a moment. I see Lance and James have hands up, so we'll go in that order. Lance?
Is a house a mourner or a dead person?
Are you talking about how their tsarat can be on houses?
Yep.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's a great question better than answer, but my assumption is that, and the Chazal talk about this, that the house and the clothing are kind of layers that come ultimately kind of to the person. They're extensions of the person. So it's not, I wouldn't think of it more literally that the house can be a mourner, but that these are kind of concentric circles around the person.
Is a mishkan a person?
No?
No.
Tell me what you're thinking about. Can
No,
the Mishkan get Sarat?
you're talking about things that, and let me put it another way. The argument here is terrific. It's super. It's wonderful. The problem is that you're dealing with a text. You're dealing with language, and you have no idea how the original audience intended this. You have no idea how the original author or authors intended this. So the only thing you have is the perceiver, the reader. And the reader is making an interpretation, just like I'm doing. Now, what is the difference between what I'm doing and what the rabbi is doing in this article? It's just another interpretation. There is no absolute correct answer to any of these questions, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that in certain ways, I think that's sort of why he adopts his sort of, I don't know what to call it, polemical, but sort of persuasive style. I think, I think I always read, and I don't say it judgmentally, but like I always read a sort of like a kind of confidence in his language where I agree with you absolutely. As we read it, we should take the stance of this is one approach. Let's challenge it. Let's find the inconsistencies. Let's ask the questions, of where it doesn't feel like it totally lands, and let's recognize it as only one take. And I think in the end he would agree with that, that it's only one take. But I think he has a style which really pushes like this is the way to see it. Just popping the name of the book in answer to Dara's question. Bracha, yes. So going back to that surface level idea. James, please.
So two small questions. One, you said the Egyptians drowned, but don't we have an idea that the Israelites saw the Egyptians on the shore after the water came back?
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. Is that bodies washed up? Yeah. I mean, right. And that may be the difference between. Oh, that's okay. Good. Good. Always good to look back in the psukim themselves. Hold on. Share my screen again. Try one more time. Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah. So the waters covered Paro's army. None of them remained. The Israelites had marched through, and then
Yeah.
by mate al Sfadam. By the way, I believe that there is I I think of my wonderful professor Richard Steiner from Revel, who I took an entire course on what's called syntactic ambiguities in biblical interpretation. Right. So I think there is a debate. Who is al Safat Hayam? Did the Israelites see the Egyptians dead
Mm.
and the Egyptians were dead on the seashore, or did the Israelites upon the seashore see the Egyptians dead? I think that is
Well, even if they saw them dead, that means they were not at the bottom of the
right,
sea.
right. That's true. Yes. So, yeah, yeah, and even still, it doesn't necessarily mean that they
Correct.
bloody. But yes, what exactly was the fate of the Egyptians is for sure not straightforwardly clear.
The other question I had was we have an upcoming Haftorah, I believe, that talks about a community of Mitzorim
Mhm.
outside the camp.
Yes. Yes,
But
right.
his talk about being separate and alone
Yes.
had
Yes.
a little hole
Yeah,
in it
I
for
don't
me.
know. Yeah, I don't know. Another great question. I'm gonna make myself a note. I don't know how literal and how halachic that grouping was. And it's certainly a narrative indication, but like what is the formal halacha? Can a mitzora who's cast out of the camp be near another mitzora who's cast out of the camp or not? Can they form a community of mitzoraim from a halachic perspective as the Torah is delineated? I'm not sure. I
I
see
mean, you
Lance.
would think there'd have to be some way to support them and provide them with basic services, especially
Right,
in the Midbar.
right. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I'm sure there's.
Rafi, am I correct? In that Haftorah, aren't the lepers the heroes?
Yeah, yeah.
So how
I,
do you
I've,
explain
I've,
that?
I'm regretful that I have to pause here. Just I have to attend to something. around 9:30. So kol hakavod to everybody. This was a really long essay. I think a lot of rich material to draw from it. The overall point, some of the asides, and we did it. And thanks to everybody. Wonderful follow-up questions, wonderful discussion, wonderful learning. And love to mom and dad. Just quickly check my calendar to make sure that things should be as usual next Monday night. And I believe they should. So looking forward to then. Stay tuned to your bite emails lots over the next 3 nights. Leil Yom HaZikaron, Leil Yom HaAtzmaut, and Yom HaAtzmaut in the evening. A lot of community and bite programming. Hope we can see each other there. So good night to all. Take care. Bye.